So very excited to be here today. We have our very own Markos is here to share with us composing, mostly for Chinese music, right? So I don't know if you read our Facebook post, our social media post. So Marco is an award-winning composer from Brampton, Ontario, so local. And you're working on your PhD as well at York, right, Marco? Good stuff. And also Marco also composed for our pop artists, international pop artists, and you have experience not just with Chinese music, but also you focus on Aboriginal music too. Ooh, good stuff. So this is really an area I'm really not an expert in, like completely foreign to me. Very good stuff. So we're very happy to have Marco here today. So Marco, whenever you're ready, the time is yours.
Thank you, Felix. Assuming everyone can hear me. I don't really know where to begin, to be honest. This is a very, it's an extremely big topic, composing for Chinese music. Maybe we can start with how I approach doing that, and then hopefully, people might find some value in that. I start the first Chinese music piece that I wrote was about 8 years ago now, I would say. And it happened out of just there was like a call for scores for a local ensemble that Patty was in, actually. But the funny part is the only reason why I joined that, the only reason why I wrote a piece for that competition was because I also had an assignment due at school where we just had to compose a piece. It was a final assignment. We could do it on whatever we want, right? So I thought, well, might as well kill two birds with one stone, which is a pretty good motivation, right? You have like, these two things going on there. But yeah, I had no idea how to or where to start with that. And so I think the first thing that was most important to me was I had to understand like what I'm working with and how that is different from anything I've ever been used to, right? So I didn't grow up with Chinese music. Like most people growing up in Canada, we're used to seeing a Western orchestra with strings and brass instruments and woodwinds and stuff like that. So as a composer, I had a decent understanding of how those instruments work and how to use them and how not to use them. But that changes considerably now when you're talking about Chinese instruments. So it's almost like I've been used to painting with a certain palette of colors for years and years, and then all of a sudden, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. Here's your new selection of colors, but they're colors that I've never seen before, I've never heard before, I've never felt before. Before I even really got into the composing part, I had to understand what these instruments were. So I remember I just got this book. This is from a while ago, I think. I think there's like different versions or editions now, but it was an instrumental guide to the Chinese orchestra. But you can get it like online. I printed mine out years ago. And why this is great is because it kind of broke down every single instrument in the Chinese orchestra, a brief history about it, and most importantly for a composer, the range, right? So what notes can you use in this instrument and what notes can't you use in this instrument, which is the most important thing for a composer, right? I can't just, randomly write something for an instrument I don't understand, right? So that's by far the most important thing. But again, I didn't want to make things too complicated in the sense that, and still to this day, this is kind of like my mantra when it comes to writing Chinese music, is that it's not, I'm not looking at replicating what the most famous Chinese composers do. I'm not trying to replicate a Chinese compositional style of music because that's not the way that I was trained. And I think it kind of gives it like, it's not something that you can just easily do. You wake up one morning and you start, writing as if you grew up with this music for years and years and years and years, right? So I had to be very realistic in how I approach writing for Chinese instruments, and that's just to keep it simple. So like when you listen to Chinese music, for me, two really big things stick out. The first thing is that it's incredibly melodic. Melody is life. Melody is the heart of Chinese music. And two, it's very what I would call percussive. You have a lot of instruments that don't have the sustain that a Western orchestra does. You have a lot of plucked strings, which are basically non-existent in a Western orchestra. And even even the instruments like the erhu, they don't have as much sort of dynamic control as something like a violin, just the way that it's constructed, right? So I had to sort of come to terms with, it doesn't matter what a Western orchestra sounds like or what I'm used to. We don't care about that, right? We need to focus on what can these instruments do, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. So it's very sort of a technical underlying approach that I have when it comes to writing for Chinese music, because at the end of the day, I'm the person that is going to be writing the notes for someone else to play. And most importantly, I don't play the vast majority of those instruments, right? So it's all about keeping things simple. But what ended up happening was when I joined the Toronto Chinese Orchestra, I used like my weekly our weekly rehearsals. Like, yeah, I was there to play, and I was there to play the stuff that I practiced the week of. But for me, it's mostly I need to listen, right? I almost cared less about what I'm playing. I want to know what everyone else is playing because I know what I'm playing, right? I can take my score home. I can practice it, right? So when I started learning the run, it was easy for me to figure out fairly quickly. Okay, so these are the types of parts that we usually get, right? Arpeggios, chords, tremolos, many times a supporting role. So I'm like, okay, I got that. I'm putting that in that, in that box. But what other instruments can go in that box, right? What are other supporting instruments? So, or what are instruments that usually have the main melody, right? So I look to the arhu, or I look to the dizi, all right, put it in that box. And then also just listening for, well, what instruments go together well and which ones would clash? Which instruments, would maybe drown out another instrument if played together, and which would sort of lift an instrument. These are all sort of like broad general ideas or thoughts that I have or had and still have, right? And so the good thing about being at TCO is that I'm not learning by reading a book, because there's only so much you can do when you read a book. There's so much more like value when you're living that experience, when you're listening to this music, when you can physically talk to other musicians in the orchestra, ask them questions, which is also one of the most important things to do for something like this. Like, I don't pretend in any way possible that I'm an expert, not even close, right? And that's okay, right? Because I'm still learning, but as I'm learning, I want to do it the right way, right? It's through collaborating with the orchestra, but also listening, just literally not even talking and listening. There's times where I'd go to rehearsal, I don't remember saying a word to another human being. And that's not because I was shy or because whatever. It was because, I'm doing my research. I need to listen what's going on, right? I need to absorb all this, because again, it's not something that is natural to me. And so slowly but surely, that is how I started to become more comfortable with writing for Chinese instruments. But really, it's still something that it takes. When I write a piece, I still ask musicians, right? Does this make sense? Can you play this? Or what would it be better if you played this way or that way? And then it gets like very, very specific, if you want it to be, with, if I want to write something for, let's say, a pipa, I'm like, is this an open string or is this a fretted string, right? And how is that going to change the timbre in the way that it's played. And maybe I want to be more specific with my instructions on if I want something to be played open, or if I want something to play fretted, or if I'm writing for the guzheng, are these open strings, or do you have to bend the string in order to achieve that note? And how is that going to change the overall, style of the melodic idea that I've presented this musician, right? So again, it can get super deep, super detailed. That's kind of how I think about it anyway. But in the end, it's always just keeping things simple, right? Understanding what role the instruments play and how they bounce off of each other. That's kind of like the biggest thing, right? Is just knowing what works. And by doing that, you listen. But then the other part is you can figure out what is usually the case in Chinese music, how instruments are usually played, and then you can ask yourself, well, do I want to do that? Or do I want to get a little risky, right? Do I want to try and stretch out these ideas? Do I want to try something new that isn't commonly done in Chinese orchestral music? But in order to do that, in order to take those risks, in order to understand when you can bend those rules, you have to understand how it's done traditionally, right? And how it's continued to be done, whether it's in Hong Kong, Singapore, mainland China, et cetera, et cetera. But again, like I don't try and I try not to replicate things that I've heard, but I do a lot of listening. I do a lot of not just at TCO, just on YouTube. I'll just watch Chinese orchestra concerts. I'll go back and see what TCO played 10 years ago. Just that way I get a good sense of what orchestras in Canada seem to be playing as well. And now what's interesting is, I suppose, given the demographics, it's been expanding, right? It's not just Chinese composers writing for Chinese orchestras. Now it's, anyone is fair game if the orchestra is open to that. And so it brings in sort of fascinating backgrounds with that as well, in the sense that everyone has different experiences. Everyone has different musical experiences that they grew up on, right? It might not just be Western influences. For me, personally, it isn't just Western influences, right? I grew up listening to, Greek music, and music that was, that is historically related and musically related, usually has odd time signatures. They have different scales. That isn't the pentatonic scale that is usually associated with Chinese music. So again, it's questions of, okay, well, how much can I bring my own background into this, musical forum, right? And is it appropriate? Is it appropriate to do so, right? So there's always these back and forth sort of internal debates that you have as a composer on, understanding your place, that you are writing music for a Chinese orchestra, which is generally catered for a Chinese audience, just giving the historical and cultural connection that the orchestra has to Chinese people. So the question is, as a non-Chinese composer, how much do you want to sort of feed into that? Do you want to make something sound more Chinese, more something that seems more familiar to the audience that you're performing to, and maybe even the musicians that are performing your piece? Or do you want to bring something new into the music tradition, right? Into Chinese music played in Canada? Should it have a different feel? Should it be personal? Should it be focused based on who the audience is? There's no right or wrong answer. You could make the argument that the fact that non-Chinese composers are now having the opportunity to write Chinese music means that, especially the orchestras, they might be more fascinated in seeing that personal twist on Chinese music or on Chinese instruments, right? And that's the purpose of reaching out to non-Chinese composers, if that makes sense. But it's not what the audience wants, right? Is what the orchestra wants the same as what the audience wants? We don't know. I mean, we can have ideas, right? And it could change from song to song, concert to concert. And so that, again, that's a big debate that I continue to have. At the end, though, I think it is important to remember the roots as to where these instruments come from and who you're playing for. And the nice part about that is, naturally, it's almost less about the notes that you hear, more so where the notes are being played from. So just the sound of Chinese instruments, I think, would bring a sense of familiarity, or a sense of, I guess familiarity is a sense of self, in the sense that if it no even if you grew up listening to Chinese music, there's going to be, popular Chinese songs that you'll hear during Chinese New Year and et cetera, et cetera. But maybe something new is okay. You still have the feeling of the Chinese music being played, right, by primarily Chinese musicians using Chinese instruments. And the reason why I keep saying that is I legitimately think that is really important, because I don't feel comfortable with straying too far away from where this comes from, right? Because I think it's really important to understand where it comes from and what it means to the people that you play it for. I think that's the most important thing to do, right? So again, there's that kind of balance as, well, how can I stay true to that, but also, giving myself some creative choice or whatever. So again, it's a debate that never ends, basically. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the general way that I approach writing for Chinese music. Again, it's just more of understanding where the instruments are, right? Which usually carry the melody, which usually plays the support, which are really loud, which are really quiet, and then putting the pieces of the puzzle together. In terms of making melodies, right? That's nothing different, whether you're writing for Chinese instruments or whether you're writing for a cello or a guitar or a rock music. The compositional approach, the creative process is exactly the same. Again, once you understand the palette that you're using, you can use those notes, and then just, you just feel it, right? So sometimes I might be improvising something that grows into something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically the gist. I mean, it's up to you. I could play a song for you if you guys want, if you, or, I don't know if it will take up too much time, Felix.
Oh no, for sure. If that, because that could build on what you were saying. I like your one of your key points, if I got it correctly, is you at least for you don't want to go too far away from where the roots are, right? Like, is this something influenced by the Aboriginal culture as well? Because I'm very interested to know why there are so many culture in music. Why Aboriginal? Why Chinese music? It seems to be on a path, sort of.
Well, for me, I don't. Aboriginal music is like is a whole different universe. So I leave that where it is in the context of writing for Chinese music. Aboriginal music is actually almost less melodic, in the sense it's very focused on timbre and rhythm, whereas yeah, Chinese music is almost all melody. But that's but one thing, what I will say is, traditionally myself, I actually do not like approaching my songs melodically. I don't love melody. It's weird. I almost prefer color and texture rather than melody. So I've had to sort of rewire the way that I compose, and understanding that just the physical capabilities of the Chinese music are so tied to sort of melodic driven songs. It makes so much sense when you break it down in that way. So that's one thing that I've had to get used to. And I guess I can show an example. Well, this one's a bit different. The only song maybe I can show you guys that I have available to me isn't actually, well, the TCO played one of my pieces a couple years ago, but I don't have that recording, unfortunately. But what I do have, this is sort of a mixed ensemble piece. So this isn't going to be exclusively Chinese, but there are Chinese instruments, and you'll definitely see some familiar faces as well. But I think for this, I'll give just a brief preface before I play this. It's a small ensemble consisting of two Chinese instruments, one Korean instrument, one Japanese instrument, and then a percussion, which basically, I don't know if you want to call it Middle Eastern. That's a pretty broad sort of category to put it in. But sort of the same sort of questions appear, right? It's like, well, how can you possibly mix all these unique cultures into one piece of music? How can you stay true to each, and how can you blend them when they're never usually blended historically, if that makes sense? And so what I tried to do, I tried to do that. I tried to find a sense of, I don't know, cultural connection for each instrument that was playing in the ensemble. But I don't know, maybe we'll just hear it, and then we'll see what happens. Let me know if you can hear it. Hopefully it's not too out of sync, if at all. This was something that was written, it was in August, but it's not public. It was played at the Harborfront Theater, and it's not public in the sense that you can't access this video on YouTube because of I don't know, some copyright, which maybe it'll finish soon. I don't know. But I'll play this, and then maybe we'll just take it from there, I guess, if you have any questions afterwards. But again, a lot of the same things that I spoke to in regards to approaching Chinese music and Chinese instruments still applies to this. And also there's big differences too. I can keep going on because this is what I do, but I don't want to, I don't want everyone to be here for 7 hours. But there's also very big differences in writing music for ensembles versus orchestra. Because an ensemble, every single part is heard at all times, right? You can't necessarily hide something in an ensemble. And so the question again is, well, who gets the melody? Who doesn't get the melody? If all these instruments are usually melodic instruments, one that carry the melody, well, how do you balance that, right? How do you make an arhu, an accompaniment instrument, which to me is, of course it can be done, but for me personally, that's not the way that I usually hear that instrument, right? That's not the way I usually compose for that instrument. And a lot of these answers, again, they're not easy answers. You kind of just have to experiment. But again, let's play the song first, and then if you have any questions, I guess let me know. Maybe I'll remember some stuff about it when it's done playing. So hopefully, share sound.
Hello everyone, my name's Emily. For the first piece today, it's called The Revelation. And Revelation was commissioned specifically for the Astrogenesis. And this is a premiere performance of the piece. And this piece was composed by Markos Koumoulas. Markos' main objective was to create a musical space where instruments from different cultures could come together into one cohesive unit and sound as natural as possible. Showing elements of Korean, Chinese, Uyghur, and Middle Eastern influences, Revelation is an ode to the rich musical traditions and heritage represented in the ensemble.
I don't know really where to start. Maybe I'll just won't say anything. But again, I guess I just try and throw in a few motifs or themes here and there, develop them. You'll hear it at the beginning, maybe in one instrument. Then you'll hear it, with everyone playing in unison, maybe harmonized. Maybe at the end we'll play it faster. It's all about sort of sprinkling ideas throughout a piece so that no matter which direction it goes in, you still feel that sense of continuity. You still feel like it's a part of the same song, whether it's a journey or whether it stays flat, right? You want to make it somewhat dynamic. Maybe I'll just leave it there. I don't know if, how we want to proceed.
Oh, and we are quite friendly and open. Feel free to speak up if you have any ideas or any thoughts to share. For me, interestingly, that does sound like Chinese music. Like, I know it's played by like Eastern instrument, but somehow I got that sense of I don't know exactly why. It does feel like Chinese music. It actually, after you mentioned about not going too far from the roots, I don't know if I was influenced by that thought, but I don't know what does other things like. But it's not quite traditional Chinese music. You can tell, right? Like almost after the introduction of the Korean instrument. It's not quite fully Chinese, but not too far from Chinese music. Okay. How's everyone feeling about this? Because I know TCO, at least for us, we are trying to, at least a petty vision as well, is to move beyond what Chinese music is supposed to be or historically. So because we've been in the community for like a quarter century now, more 25 years and over. So it's slowly branching out, and it's very exciting to see something like that. And you're true to your word. It's not quite so out there. We playing like Western music with Chinese instruments, because that's something different. And I guess in a way it's easier to do that if we just playing Western music. We just switch the note to Chinese instrument. But what's everyone else's thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think Joe also mentioned in the chat that he has a question. So he asked Marco, thanks for sharing your work and great job to the musicians as well. And then he would like to know what challenging part to compose and which section that you like most.
Thank you for the question. My favorite was definitely where it picks up. Dun, 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 and the darbuka's playing. When I was approaching that song, there were two major things going on. From what you can hear, I was very sort of focused on the kayagum, which is the Korean instrument that's sort of similar to a guzheng. I've always wanted to write for that instrument, and I'm particularly interested in traditional music where that instrument's played, like sanjo, which is basically it means like almost like fragmented melodies, and I try to stay true to that sense where I'm kind of, again, I guess we could it'd be easier maybe if you hear it back, but it's dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. So what I was going for there is starting off with these little ideas. Dun 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 dun. Rest, right? You want to leave room for the silence in there, but then it grows to sort of a flowing end of a melody before returning. And so I tried to just the idea of fragmented melodies for that main part. But I knew eventually I wanted to pick up the speed a little bit, because again, this was commissioned for this ensemble, and they told me what instruments that they had and what I was going to compose for, right? So I had a percussion player, and I wanted to make sure that she was having a good time too, which I think about a lot, right? I don't want to write music where the musicians are bored to play the music, right? I want them to have a good time. I want them to enjoy the music. And the way that, to be honest, this is the way that I was thinking about this for that section. is that I was pretty influenced by the idea anyway of like Uyghur traditional music in northwest China, because they have it's a very different feel that sort of influence more so on like their Turkic linguistic background and culture and Muslim, religion. And I thought, what a cool way that would be to sort of, connect what we have with Chinese instruments or East Asian instruments with this Middle Eastern percussion that is present in the ensemble. So I tried to find like a geographical, musical, cultural midway point to justify or to try and mend these two completely different parts of the world together. When I write music like this, that's why I kind of was saying before, like I really like to try and keep it as culturally appropriate as possible without overstepping any boundaries, which is another sort of topic altogether. But I try to keep it respectful as best as I can. So I guess that sorry, there's another part. I'm answering this very slowly. I apologize. Which ones you found the most challenging to compose? Yeah, I think just overall, just the idea of how do I make Chinese instruments, Japanese instruments, Korean instruments, and Middle Eastern percussion sound like they belong in the same group? That's the question that I kept at the top of my head when constructing that. But of course, there's influences from all of them sprinkled everywhere. So it's just a matter of, does it fit? Does it make sense? I don't know. I guess that's up for you guys to decide. But
So I do have a question. So I thought you mentioned like it was composed for that ensemble, right? So did you have a chance to, hear the player play before you start your composing process?
So for that particular piece, not for everyone. It was mostly I mean I already had I just asked, like, for example, for the Kagum and Shinobue, which is the Japanese sort of like a Dizi, if you want to compare it. I just needed to know the range, right? I needed to know its capabilities. I needed to know what they can do, what they can't do. So we had some early, it would be mostly just, I'd write a segment, I'd send it, does this work? Yes or no? Oh, this note is too hard, this note, blah, blah, and then you fix it. But then when they performed it, that was one of the first times that I heard it. So that was fun. Yeah, I mean, it was part of like a larger concert, right? So they were kept very busy learning, a good number of songs. So, but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I had that question because it just mixed together and presented in a very natural way that you don't feel like, something is off or, they doesn't belong. Like you said, it's all blended together, but at the same time, they maintain their uniqueness. So you can't hear that. And I really enjoyed that part. So I was like, oh, maybe did you have the chance to really hear every player play so that you have that in your mind? Okay, the Japanese Dizi will sound like that, while, something else will have a different characteristics. So it, you have to blend that together in order to form that or compose the piece.
Yeah, for that particular one, I usually what I did instruct them is, when I send them their parts, when I send them their score, I say, this is the base. If you want to extend or expand on these melodic ideas or rhythm, whether it's, melodically, rhythmically, or through extended techniques, please do that, right? Because there's those little nuances that are hard to notate, for one, and two, are hard to ask if you're not totally familiar with the exact details of every instrument. For that particular song, I was not familiar with everything, right? So it's just about dialogue, right? You have to, if they're willing to play your song, you have to be open to their opinions and that's why I'm saying, kind of like, the collaboration is everything, right? I'm like, just because I write the song doesn't mean I'm the king of the castle. Give me a break, right? My song will be nothing, if the musicians don't play it. And so that's everything. But what I will say with TCO is, because I know each section more than any other sort of orchestra or ensemble that I've written for, that gives an interesting dynamic of understanding sort of where the strengths lie, right? And who you might be able to, or what sections you might be able to push a little bit more, or really or maybe even just to test yourself. Oh, I wonder how this will sound, and I can talk to them personally, or I can give them a little nudge, give them something a bit more challenging, and see how that will develop based on the particular section, just out of familiarity of each section in the orchestra. But that's really rare. That's really, really rare. Usually you don't have that luxury.
Marcos, one more quick question, because you talk about melody and melodic quite a few times. So the piece that you just showed us, how melodic would you say it is? Like, because you mentioned having a strong melody or very melodic is like a key or in like sort of obvious characteristics of, at least historically, for Chinese music, right? Mm-hmm. Which I agree with you. Yes. If I look at our Chinese New Year music, Moon Festival music, or just common Chinese music, they always seems to have a strong melody, and most of the time it's played by the erhu. Sometimes it's easy. Mm-hmm. But the piece that you show us, the melody is not as obvious in a way, like compared to the traditional one, to me anyway. I don't know if how do you feel about that one?
Well, it's funny, right? Because when I think of, not only do I think of like very melody driven pieces historically in Chinese music, but I also think big and fast, enormous, just massive sounds, right? That's why I say it's almost like percussive. It almost doesn't matter. It's like even the erhu becomes a percussion instrument. And then even if you look back, and I am not a Chinese music historian, so I might be wrong, but from my understanding, I own, for example, a yangqin, but an older one that was used in Cantonese opera, and it's small, much smaller than the yangqin that I see in the TCO now, and that what I see on YouTube and whatnot. So from my understanding, that was more of like a governmental decision to try and, by the Chinese government, to make things bigger, right? Bigger and stronger and louder, to sort of to have the music represent the strength and the whatever characteristic that the Chinese government wanted to portray in their traditional music. And so the strings are thicker and they're made out of steel and they're louder. I even think the Ran was maybe it was like gut strings, I'm assuming. Again, I'm assuming. Don't quote me. But now it's steel. I just like there is this obvious sort of approach into making the music bigger and faster and stronger. And that I think it does characterize Chinese music. But when I compose, I don't usually have this big, melodic, fast approach or sort of preference in my music. And so that's something that I have to balance, or at least maybe I just, with each time that I approach a piece of music, I have to decide, well, how big, fast, and powerful do I want to be? Or do I want to stick to these more mellow, sort of undertone melodic ideas, which I think what most of this, the song that you heard would fall under. But again, maybe it's that the instruments that are constructed now in China, that I feel like their strengths lie in these, loud, melodic, powerful, amazing, the songs that like like that we hear in that Chinese New Year and stuff. They're enormous. They're incredible, right? And I think that was one compromise I kind of had to make with it's like, well, I acknowledge that, I do understand that, but maybe I don't want to do that. Right? So it's kind of like you have to know your strengths, your strengths and weaknesses, as well as the instrument's strength and weaknesses, and then you kind of find that balance. But maybe one day I'll try and write a piece like that. But yeah, I mean, everyone has their different approaches to songwriting and composition, right? So it really depends on and we're also talking, general ideas, right? Of course, even in China, it's variable based on the individual composer. That's without a doubt. But anyway.
Thank you, Marcos. But I agree with you because the audience might be, because you mentioned what the audience wants too. It seems sometimes that's at least locally, that's what seems to be what audience wants. If we play something very mellow for a very long time, it may have different effects to the audience.
Yeah, I don't disagree, for sure.
Oh, there are actually quite a few questions on the chat box right now.
Oh, okay.
There are a second, third one, and a fourth one. Don't know. For those who don't know, you can click the chat CHAT button, and you will see the question as well. So the second one is, I think is that the same Joe? No, that's a different Joe. Okay, welcome. And what instruments and technology are you using during your composing process? Do you approach it differently than other genres?
When I compose, I use what's a program called Sibelius. It allows you to put in music, put in like notes online rather than write it all by hand. So you just have like it'll just be like a empty score sheet, and then you can just plop whatever whatever notes you want in there, and you can actually change the sound of each instrument so that it replicates the sound of the instrument that you're writing for. So but the Sibelius wouldn't have the Chinese instruments as a sound bite or whatever. So sometimes I have to, for example, if I'm writing for an erhu, I might have the sound be like a violin, or if I'm writing for a pipa, I might have the sound as a guitar, or a guzheng, I might have it as a harp, just to give myself an idea of how it might sound. And then sometimes I'll use a software called Logic, which allows me to, the sounds are more realistic. There's no score. I'll maybe record myself playing the parts on a piano. So I'll be recording on a piano, but it'll sound like a guzheng, right? I write something on a piano, but it comes out as a drum. So I'll literally drum on my piano, do, 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 right? And that's the sound that'll come out. So that gives myself and a lot of composers an idea of how it all would come together without hearing the live musicians play it, before you send it off, kind of thing. And do you approach it differently than other genres? Yeah, of course I do, 100%. Technology-wise, no. Compositionally, every genre is every genre is different. Though what I will say, the one thing that stays true between all genres in my composition approach is improvisation. Almost all of my melodic ideas that I come up with are improvised, in the sense that I'll pull up maybe a sound bite of an erhu, and I think, okay, I want to write a melody for this instrument, and I'll go on my piano, which now sounds like an erhu, and I'll just without even thinking, just press notes and try and find some combinations of notes that I find maybe more appealing, or maybe I'll even put on a metronome, right? And then I'll play along to the metronome, and then build it from there. That's kind of one of the most common things that I would do. Do you want me to I have the chat here. I might as well just, unless someone has something to say in between, I'll just run through these. Joe A, you fulfilled one of your wishes, composing for the Korean Kayagum. Which instruments do you have a strong desire to compose for in the future? Actually, what I've always wanted to do, I've composed for this instrument before, naturally, being when writing for Chinese orchestra. But my section might be, happy to hear this. I really want to write a Ran ensemble piece. I would love that.
Please, please do.
I think that'd be fun because I actually get to like play what I write, right? Sometimes I don't do that, and I think there's some cool stuff that we can achieve there. And again, that's another thing of just knowing, the people that I play with every week, right? Knowing their strengths and weaknesses, and kind of take from there. I think that would be super fun. We can get some cool sounds, I'm sure. Okay, I'm just gonna go to the next one. Do you always compose with the instruments in mind, or sometimes write the song, then think about which instrument is best? It's a great question. See, it usually it's I think it's more common for me to know what instruments are available, in the sense that if I'm writing for the TCO, I know what instruments are there naturally. So I have those instruments in mind. For the song that you heard, they told me what instruments there are, so I have to write for those instruments. Maybe more so for my more personal stuff. Like if I'm writing for a film, let's say, they almost never, as my dog yells, they almost never tell you, or tell me anyway, what instruments they want. They might say, oh, we want this sort of feel or that sort of feel. And in that sense, I might write something on the piano or on my guitar. I might just think of a chord progression and I'll think, maybe I don't want that on guitar. Maybe I'll want that on something else. So it's pretty, yeah, it's not that complicated. I mean, with the softwares that I have, you have so many instruments and sounds. Literally all it takes is you just click a button, right? And your piano turns to a ukulele, or it turns into I don't know, a trombone, right? So it takes sort of trial and error and experimenting before you find the desired sound. What is this? What is the name of the book that you use, which gives you the ranges of different instruments? It is called An Instrumental Guide to the Chinese Orchestra. It's by Samuel Wong Sheng Miao. I'm pretty positive it's Singaporean. That might be backwards. Publication. I'll write it down here.
It's actually I don't think he publishes that book anymore. The newest one is the Tongue Guide to the Chinese Orchestra. It's the same author.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, like I said, I was pretty sure there was like new editions or new series or whatever, but this is the one that I got years ago, and it still works, I would say. So I don't even know if this is actually available anymore, but maybe Patty would know.
Yeah, I don't think this version is available anymore. It's the Tongue one. The Tongue one is the latest one.
Excellent.
It seems, this might sound cliche, but it seems the world is getting smaller and Chinese music is being influenced, or the other way around. The other cultures are being influenced by Chinese music. Well, historically, based on what I understand, is the Chinese orchestra seems to absorb all the surrounding culture. So because they, or we, or Chinese in the past at least, call themselves the Central Kingdom. So they just take in everyone's instruments, sort of, and then just make it into one group kind of thing. Do you see this as the future of like Chinese music, or at least in Canada, or locally, even in Toronto or Ontario? What do you think, like long term for local orchestra in Toronto? So we are far away from the origin of the music. So what do you see is a good, or what's your view on the future? Like, where do you think is a good path forward, or what's good for music, or what's good for the community, or even the audience? But I know this is a huge topic, though. Like from a composer point of view, I know it could be challenging, right? Writing with so many influences in the same place here.
Yeah. again, I've kind of said it already, and this might sound weird just coming from like a non-Chinese composer, but like I'm like super, super, super pro Chinese centered anything, right? Make Chinese music and Chinese origin and Chinese culture and Chinese tradition the center, and then spread it out from there, right? Because that's what this is all about at the end of the day. That's what the like. I really think for TCO and Chinese music in Canada, even 10 years from now, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain that the majority of consumers, the majority of people that are coming out to these shows are going to be ethnic Chinese. And I think that's important to know. I think that's really important to understand. Also, the people who are playing this type of music. What I love about the TCO is that for me, it's almost like I absolutely love that ethnic Chinese in Canada, whether they're from China originally, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., or they're born and raised in Canada, they have this. It's this amazing sort of like mixture of old and new, right? But the core is still there, right? The reasoning for being in the orchestra is still there, where it's an expression of culture, right? And it's an expression of understanding where you come from, right? And that's why and again, that's really weird because I'm not Chinese, right? So but I understand how that might feel, right? And there's that sense of community which exists within the orchestras in Canada, which I don't think is ever going to break. And that's sort of what I mean is, with if you, as long as you keep that in mind, right, it'll be easier to understand, or it'll be easier for whatever direction that you want to go in. As long as you keep that at heart, you understand, the importance or the positive sort of aspects of what these orchestras are, because there's a lot of communities out there that don't have such an amazingly rich history of music, and such passion for it, to have these orchestras, right, in Toronto, in Calgary, in Vancouver, et cetera, et cetera. Which is why, and this is also funny because I'm pretty hopeless at it. I love it when we still give out music in jampu, in numbered notation. I'm like, that's amazing, right? But though it was interesting to hear that, yes, Dr. Chen, how it's actually shifting, even in Taiwan, because Western notation gives more, has more specificity in its instruction. So again, it depends, and I'm not one to say anything, right? At the end of the day, but I think it's also cool personally. Well, because I guess because I can be included, that these orchestras are also open to reaching out to see other influences and to see what people can bring to the table, so to say. I don't really think I answered your question, but I think I know it's something to think about, at least, though I don't really know what we're thinking about anymore. I was kind of rambling.
So that's
But
good, actually, Marco. Your thoughts, your feel it shows actually very motivational. It's like it's a little bit, it's more than about composing in a sense, because your approach is perhaps there's some how should I say it? Because it's common, at least for me, in Western culture, it's common to compare things in general with the Western standard. Like, oh, this instrument is not good. You cannot play it in perfect pitch. There's something wrong with its construction. It's wood. It's off by a little bit. Things like little things like that.
yeah,
Of course, there are lots of things the Chinese orchestra can learn from other culture, or including Western instruments. So I appreciate your appreciation of the diversity of culture. Actually, I don't know if that's related to your original research, but so it's a very refreshing way of looking at it too. Because I personally, my understanding is, at least traditionally, Chinese music wasn't played like at 4/4 time or 2/4 time or with such a structured format. And so it's a great way and actually very motivational for our local community Chinese orchestra. Like stay to our root, but also like learn from other culture kind of thing. Not about inferiority or superiority. Like this type of music is better. Learn from it and make it sound like this type of music kind of approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool, Marco. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to keep it centered to where it comes from, right? And then you can branch off in whatever works best for the community or for whatever works for that's my opinion anyway. That's how I would approach it, though of course there's differences in opinion across.
But that to be true, yes, there are also many technicality things that the Chinese orchestra can work on, like basic stuff such as like instrument construction and things like that. But I don't know if that's culture or just sometimes just craftsmanship that needs to be improved. But that's I guess a whole different discussion.
But even that is probably like based on the preference, right? Yeah, it depends. I mean, yeah, there's again, I'm just saying words, you know. I'm not making a law. I'm not doing anything, but I'm just saying sort of some of these are the thoughts that I have. I mean, like you said, it's like it's like way beyond composition at this point.
No, I can sort of I think I can hear it. I'm not an expert on composing, but I can hear that you try to have that core, like that Asian Oriental feel to it, but not you as you said, you're not trying to reproduce because that's not really improving or evolving the music, I guess. If you're just doing something that has already been done again and again, or but so let not just let me speak. Anyone else have any thoughts? Feel free to speak up. Yeah, we're quite a friendly group here. Patty, any thought on this? Because the future of the Chinese orchestra direction, at least in Toronto, what are your feel or for composing?
Well, I really appreciate that Marco has, written for Chinese instruments, and it was because I played one of his pieces before that I asked him to come and play with us, and also possibly write more for us. I think it's definitely a direction that I think we should embrace, like finding a balance between traditional and also our newer identity, where we've been around here for over almost 30 years now, and so I think it's time that we embrace like other cultures as well as Chinese culture. And I think like Marco, having your own background, you're Greek Canadian, so perhaps do you use any of your Greek background to write for your pieces? Like write your pieces?
Yeah, naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I've spoken with other composers that have written for Chinese instruments, and they also say, you write from your strength. So your strength may be Jewish music, it may be Greek music, it may be, music of other cultures. But I think it's all part of being Canadian as well, that we can appreciate other cultures too. And just like Chinese instruments bring different colors or timbres to the compositions. And I think that the more that we can bring these sounds beyond the Chinese community, I think it'll inspire more composers to write for Chinese instruments too.
Well, it's interesting too in the sense that Chinese instruments in itself, right? And this is kind of what I was saying before, will sort of bring that Chinese sound, no matter what notes are being played by the instruments. So when you're playing an original piece of music for Chinese instruments, I think that's very different in comparison to writing a Western piece of music that was already composed with Chinese instruments, if that makes sense. I feel like when you're writing something for the instruments versus trying to write something that was written for other instruments and you're just, using Chinese instruments instead, I feel like the impact isn't as consistently positive, in the sense that there could be things technically that might not, work as well, because just simply it wasn't written for that purpose. And so by sort of reaching out to composers, I think you're naturally going to have non-Chinese influences, but at the same time, it should be a more organic process, because you are writing with Chinese instruments in mind, right? And with the sounds in mind, with that tradition in mind, versus the opposite. So I think it's I kind of like what you said, this new identity. I think that's interesting, right? Because in the sense of identity, identity is fluid, right? Even outside of music, right? It really depends on so many components and so many aspects. So trying to explore that, again, I don't think it's a black and white issue. I think this is something that's going to evolve depending on whatever direction life goes, or whoever's coming in, whoever's going out. But that's what's I know there's a lot of Chinese orchestras. Maybe it's changing in the last decade, but they're only looking at traditional, they don't want any outside influence. And I think that's cool too. But there is something to say with if the TCO has been in Toronto for 30 years, with all the the different cultures that exist in the city, I don't think it's outrageous to assume or to propose that maybe there could be some positive aspects of those different cultures that could be explored within the Chinese orchestra. Find a new sound, maybe and this is why I'm interested in Chinese music in Canada specifically, right? Because the origin is the same, but the environment is different, right? So how does the environment affect the sound that comes from these instruments? And I think we're seeing that slowly, just naturally. I guess like myself, using people who didn't grow up on Chinese music, right? So they're coming from a completely different point of view. I'm going to stop because I talk a lot.
No, well, you can also look at the Chinese diasporas in other parts of the world. For example, even in Singapore, though there's Chinese orchestra there, they play primarily traditional Chinese orchestral music, but then they're also taking in the influence of Indian music. And other cultures, and the composers there are bringing that into the Chinese orchestra as well, because of where they are and the population and the audience that they want to reach out to. So I think for us, we're a Chinese orchestra. I think we should have that traditional aspect, but it's finding a balance where you're also welcoming new influences.
This is going to be super nerdy, so I'm going to keep it like really short, but just the exploration of what Chinese Canadian sound could be, or what it already is, or what it's turning into in comparison to other, like you said, Singapore and whatnot. That is super interesting to me. And I'll be looking forward to your paper on that in the future. Because it's got to be different, right? It's got to be different, right? So, but how different, right? How much do you go beyond the boundaries? How much do you bend?
Okay, think about this. Chinese music in China is changing. It's not the same.
Yeah, and that's why
it has to keep changing.
That's what I learned from Dr. Chen. So I thought, okay, so this is getting interesting now, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing now an evolution in how things are changing, which way, right? But which way should it turn to? Because there's different routes that one can take, and I think it's going to be cool to see a side-by-side comparison depending on the environment in which you're in. Canada, US, France, Mauritius, you know what I mean, et cetera, et cetera.
Exciting.
Joe mentioned tradition is a moving target is the lesson. Would you like to expand on that, Joe? Feel free. I think, Joe, I see you unmuted yourself, but I don't think we can hear you. Okay. I think I know what you mean. Like tradition, basically, I guess is us. We are the tradition. We are building it. Is that something you're referring to? Like moving target, like we constantly moving. That's how tradition is formed.
I mean, like tradition is tied to the people, right? So if the people are going to different places, or they're experiencing different whatever, of course things will change, right? But that's what I was saying, is in the sense that as long as it's Chinese centered, Chinese Canadian centered, right, then you can take whatever route you want to take, right? You take charge in what the destiny of that sound is, right? And not let someone else come in and say, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, I think that's where it could get troublesome, right? It's a matter of just, taking it into your own hands, right? There's no wrong way of doing things, right? As long as it comes from a place of, a good place, and there's nothing wrong with exploring new things. But I also think it's important to not necessarily, throw yourself into something due to outside influences, right? It should be something that's constructed internally, and naturally and organically, and where it goes is where it goes based on that. That's what I think. But
that makes sense. That's actually a very deep question for TCO, for the orchestra. It's like almost identity soul searching. Like what are we represent, or what are we in we are very far away from the origin of the music. So very, very interesting thoughts for thought. Food for thought. Is that the expression? Yes.
Yeah, this got a little too deep, so I apologize for everyone who's thought they're getting
good stuff. Because composing is, I guess, is the so for musician or people who play music, without composition, like it's tough. Like it's part of the it's like a critical part of us. Like without music, we would just keep playing old music again and again.
For sure.
Yeah. So feel free to share your thought. This is the time for a Q&A, question and answer. Although there are already quite a few questions, so good stuff. We seem to have a shy orchestra. But interestingly, this I do not make this up, but humbleness and being not aggressive, not assertive, is actually considered Chinese virtue, at least historically. So I guess everyone is being humble. Okay. But anything else you would like to add, Markos, at this time?
No, I think that's it. I think I've said enough. But yeah, I get, like, again, for me it's different, right? Because I'm composing from, as an outsider, right? So my approach and the mentality that I have when writing Chinese music is going to be considerably different, versus someone who, grew up with this tradition, right? It's something that they breathe since the moment that they were born. It's very different. So that's why sort of these sort of bigger philosophical ideas naturally sneak into the way that I write the music. So that's all I really have to say.
Oh no, but thank you so much, Markos. And you might consider yourself as an outsider in terms of composing, but I can say with confidence, TCO consider you an insider. So thank you for joining us and spending your time sharing your thought and your music. There's we cover so many topics today. It's great, and I think it's motivational too for TCO and our members and all the guests who join us today. Hope we each take something back and think about it, and feel free, we can build on this discussion later. We will be seeing Markos around, and hopefully see everyone in person soon, maybe in the fall. No one knows yet. So again, thank you. Thank you again, and see you guys next time, and I will keep everyone updated with email. Thank you again, Markos. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.